folks, back here and with you once again, and this is going to be a response to Godless Engineer, because god damn it if I don't think the guy does... I'm going to give the guy points for trying. I really am. But the thing is that everything he talks about in this video is wrong. Now the thing is, I'm not saying that based upon my own authority, and based upon my understanding of comparative religion. The thing is comparative religion has changed a lot in the last 50 years. And Godless Engineer seems to be oblivious to that fact, with the fact he keeps on using the Raglan scale, which is an inaccurate way of portraying whether somebody is a historical figure or not. As anyone who saw my last video, which he still hasn't responded to, by the way, despite the fact he said in the comments he would. Anyway, hopefully he'll respond to this, because now I'm here in person, and he can actually respond to me in person. Now the thing is that I'm going to get into facts about where these claims originated from. So, with that said, go ahead, Godless Engineer.
Reasons why. First, the idea of resurrection as a new, embodied life after death was foreign to the pagan worldview. Recall how the Athenians scoffed at Paul's preaching on the resurrection in Acts chapter 17. How could the early Christians have copied from pagan myths when the Christian idea of resurrection was not even a part of the pagan mental framework?
There are plenty of records of dying and rising gods. Normally they are attributed to being like vegetation or seasonal gods, being that like the seasons, you know, it dies at one point and then it revives later on.
But yeah, that idea was debunked. The idea of dying and rising god was debunked by Jonathan C. Smith in his book, The True Divine, Christianity and its Impacts in the West, which is a superb book which I recommend anybody to read, and indeed Godless Engineer to read. And the fact that he hasn't read it just shows me the level of research he's probably gone to. But I'll say that for another time. The thing is that he doesn't know how far this conversation has gone, because again, he's probably going to cite something like, you know, Treadman at me, and he doesn't understand that actually he agrees with what John Thesis Smith. He just said they exist in certain things. But I said, so Mr. Godless Engineer, we said that the claim you just made was erroneous, and it's disprovable by John T. Smith, and I'll even provide links for the book so you can have a read yourself. Or we're just going to consider that John T. Smith doesn't exist, and we're just ignore it. Here we go.
I mean, you have many of these particular gods. Krishna, Romulus, Osiris. I mean, the history's just littered with them. And they all predate the Bible. Just take the story of Romulus, if you will. He wasn't killed by some kind of...
Right, but the thing is, Romulus wasn't resurrected though, was he? He became a god. Because resurrection is a very Jewish belief, which is body goes into ground, body comes out of ground. That's a Jewish belief. It is not a Roman belief. Their beliefs do not have that. And I know because I've actually studied what Romans actually believe. They believe that the gods had children. Romulus was one of those children. She was born to a specific thing. He ascended to Athens along with other gods. That's basically what happened. There is no dying and rising there. Because where is the rising? Where did he come back to life? He didn't. Actually, there's a lot of stories in Roman mythology about things coming back to life and them not being successful. So I'd like you to point me to where, at any point of Roman mythology, somebody comes back to actual physical life. Because that's what resurrection is.
A government entity or by some really pissed off Jews or something. No, he was torn apart by a tornado. But then later on, there were reports, primarily from Proculus Julius. I know I'm fucking butchering that. But he claimed that Osiris was put back together and then rose in this heavenly form and then ascended into heaven. In case that didn't raise an eyebrow, after dying, Osiris appeared in a vision to one lowly guy.
But there is no return, though. None of the stuff you said is true. The thing is that there are many stories of Osiris, and you even admit that later in this video, and none of them involve him coming back. They try to bring him back with a resurrection harm, but he's king of the underworld. He's convinced by his own father to be that king of the underworld, and his son becomes the next person who's ruler of Egypt. Now, if you understand the Egyptian mythology at all, it's actually mirrored in what happens in the real world. Because again, what's happening in the real world is that one one pharaoh it dies and the other takes over, and the other, and there are certain aspects of which in their mythology which reflects stuff that has in real world. You would actually know this if you actually read any sort of credible Egyptology, written by Erik Hornung or anything like that. So I'd like to know who actually says this. Who? Because you see, I've actually read books on Egyptology, and none of them support your claim. So continue.
It's just walking along and gave him basically his gospel and then ascended into heaven. That's what that. All this happened in about 750 BCE. So, I mean, it's definitely before the Bible.
But again, none of the stuff you just said is true. Again, as I said, the Egyptian mythological story changes throughout the centuries, which you admit later. But whoever this guy is, no. I've thrice and 20 times no, because that is not how their beliefs worked. It shows me you know nothing about how the ancient Egyptians actually believed in their religion.
Second, the majority of the alleged parallels are bogus, because the deities never really rise from the dead. For example, after dying, the spirit of the Greek god Attis entered into a pine tree. That's hardly a resurrection.
I'm not exactly sure which Attis he's talking about. I mean, I don't know if anybody else here is wondering that, but I mean, I've tried to look it up, and this isn't Attis in any kind of form that I've seen. So just to give you a lowdown on who Attis is in Greek mythology, Attis was actually born of a Lorena Bobbitt kind of situation. The Greek gods found this one particular god who was a hermaphrodite, so they went all crazy Bobbitt on him and, cut off the wiener, cut off the male portion, and just cast it aside. Not unlike Lorena Bobbitt. And then, from that member, wherever the fuck it was, grew an almond tree. Now, there was this other goddess named Nana that came by, and you got an almond from the tree and put it on her titties, all right? And then once it was on her titties, it impregnated her. I know, it's weird. It's gonna get weirder. Then once Attis is born, she discards Attis. Nana discards Attis, and a he-goat raises him. I'm serious. I can't make this shit up. I am not this creative. But then later on, the guy who lost his member, Mr. Bobbitt, comes back and finds it, Attis and whatnot, and makes Attis go mad and cut off his junk. But then, Mr. Bobbitt, Sir Bobbitt, he feels a little guilty about it, so he makes it so that the body doesn't decay or rot or anything like that. So, I mean, Attis, I'm not sure about the whole resurrection deal, about him being resurrected or anything, but, I mean, he was born of a virgin, and then later on, I mean, he was killed, by the guy who lost the member. But he didn't resurrect into a pine tree. The closest I can get with this is that Attis was born from an almond being placed on the titties of Nana. Now I've got Nana titties.
The thing is that Godless Engineer and this guy are actually both correct, because again, both stories are actually correct. Now, the thing is that that the idea of him being resurrected actually originates in Kersey Graves that crucify saviours. About that, actually, Godless Engineer needs to read if he's actually wondering where Jesus Mythicism actually comes from, because that's where it originates from, is those sort of books. Now, the reason that Jesus Mythicism don't like us to remember those books, because if you actually read what's in those books, we sort of understand where Jesus Mythicism actually comes from. It's not everywhere factual. It's from the belief that all religions originated in Atlantis and no, not kissing. But never mind.
In my head. Get out!
The Egyptian god Osiris never rose from the dead either. He merely reigned as king of the underworld. As the Egyptologist Henry Frankfurt explains in his book Kingship and the Gods, Osiris was not a dying god at all, but a dead god. He never returned among the living.
Oh, hold the phone there, altar boy. Okay, Osiris isn't as clear-cut as he's making it to be. Basically, what happened with Osiris is that he was betrayed by Set, and then his body was cut up and moved to various different locations in Egypt. Isis, she was going through and trying to, put his body back together. Once she got all of his body put back together, he was able to go and rule over Duat. Right? Now, Duat was supposed to be a real place that you could get to or whatnot, or that existed here on Earth. All right, it was supposed to be a real place. Now, if you remember, after Jesus supposedly died on the cross, where did he go? To Hades. Oh, I'm sorry. That's how the Greeks were.
Oh, hold your horses there, Mr. Godless Engineer. You're wrong. Now let's look at this. What the guy said is actually correct, and what you just said is incorrect. Because actually, sorry, I'm being too harsh with you. You're actually partially correct. Because most of the story involves them, as you said, Set betraying Osiris, being separated, then getting his body together. But what you didn't understand that in some of the stories, he's missing a certain body part, his member. Then she has to carve a magic phallus, and sometimes she's been impregnated with a magic phallus. Now, the thing is that nowhere in that is he resurrected. They tried to resurrect him with the resurrection horns, but again, you would know that if you know anything about Egyptology, but of course, you don't, because you've never bothered to read anything, but I have, so I do know about it. So, seeing that it's like Jesus going to Hades, no, or hell, whatever, no. It's nothing like that. It's basically, that's what happened, is that the Pharaoh would die, he would go into the ground, and the guy would be next guy up, and the guy would be the next king down there. That's basically how their religion worked. It's easy to understand, it's simple. So I don't understand where you get these madcap ideas from. Well, I do understand where you get from idiots, that's where you get them from.
Wrote it. But in Grecian it was written as Hades, but it was Sheol, or whatever the Jewish hell is. Basically, what you've got is you've either got the urban ghetto in Sheol, or you go uptown to the nicer suburbs. It's like a gated community. The gated community represents those that, appeased Yahweh or whatnot. That's where they went. If you fucked with Yahweh's shit, you get sent to the ghetto.
And in one sentence, it shows me you know fuck all about Jewish afterlife beliefs. Sheol was just a grave. That's it. There was no depiction of hell. There was no levels. That whole thing was Dante's Inferno. And if you understand what hell is, it's nothing like that people understand now. Because hell is, it was a place. It's actually Gehenna, which was a fire pit back in the ancient days. You can look up it if you want to on Google. I'm not actually do that for you down below. Now, anybody who's actually read the Bible in the original Greek, which I know Godless Engineer you must have because you're so fascinated by the subjects, would understand that. But again, he doesn't, because he doesn't want to understand it, because I don't know why. Now, the thing is that this is very clear to see. His idea of levels, no. Jesus goes to the grave and then comes out of the grave. That's basically what the story's saying. It's not saying he literally went and fought the devil. That's not what it's saying. It's basically saying he came out, went to the grave, came out of it. That's basically what it said. I conquered evil by doing that. That's basically that's all the idea of Jesus is. So I don't know where you get these madcap ideas about Christianity from. I think it's coming from a place that doesn't really understand where these ideas about Christianity originated from. I'm guessing he's read a lot of stuff that doesn't understand Christianity either. But anyway, we'll continue.
Oh, motherfucker! Which I have to say, I just now realized how calling it the ghetto, referring to Jews, is a bit edgy. But this does directly correlate to Jesus, because Sheol supposedly existed here on Earth, like it existed in our physical reality. So, I mean, the Duat.
By the way, what is points for the Holocaust joke? Yes, supremely edgy. Never mind that a lot of people who agree with the same ideology you do, atheism died in the Holocaust. Edginess. I don't know. But anyway, yeah, the reason why is Gehenna was a real place on Earth. Sheol was not. It was the grave. You're confusing Sheol with Gehenna. They're two different places. I think you've just read a really bad translation. If you read the Nestle Allen or the Westcott Hort or anything like that, anything that is like, post when they brought the two traditions together, you understand this. But of course, Godless Engineer doesn't understand this because he's never actually read any of that.
And Sheol are basically the same thing. So with Jesus going to rule over that, I mean, Jesus went up into heaven to rule at the right hand of his Father, right? I mean, it's the same. I mean, they're comparable at least. I mean, while they're not a direct copy, like Jesus isn't a direct copy of what happened to Osiris, it's still comparable enough to draw that comparison and to, say, this definitely influenced people back then.
But again, the Egyptian underworld and Gehenna are two different concepts, and Sheol's a different concept. You seem to you seem to be confusing Gehenna with Sheol. They're two different things. Again, the thing is that Sheol was a real place, because that's where they went to rule after they got done ruling here. That was their beliefs. Nowhere in Jewish beliefs did they think that anybody could return from Sheol. That's the reason why it was exceptional when Jesus did it. Gehenna was an actual real place that you can go to. No one thought you could go to Sheol and return. Nobody. That's why it was pretty important when Jesus did it.
This particular legend in Egypt that's directly adjacent to fucking Galilee and Jerusalem and shit definitely had an impact on people. But one of his big complaints as far as Jesus goes is that Jesus was resurrected into like a real body or whatnot. But even that's debatable because Jesus was actually resurrected into a spiritual body. I mean, he ascends up into heaven and he disappears at will like goddamn Batman. That's not real. That's spiritual or aka fake.
Well, you'd be right if it wasn't for one thing. That was Thomas. Now, which is probably one of the most famous Bible stories of all, where Thomas said he would not believe that Jesus had returned until he put his hands inside the wounds. How could you put your hands inside the wounds of a spiritual thing? How? So that sort of like debunks the idea of spiritual, that then you have to have a physical body to have wounds. Or does medicine work differently in your worldview?
Fake news.
A third reason why this objection fails is that the sources for some of these alleged resurrections come after Christianity. For example, the resurrection account of the Greek god Adonis doesn't show up until the 2nd century.
Oh, man. Okay, so Adonis. Adonis was actually worked into the Grecian mythology very early. Now, true, what he's referencing here is that Adonis, like the whole cult of Adonis and the fact that Adonis, well, at least to them, a fact that in the mythology Adonis resurrected, there wasn't a written account of that until much later, but there's nothing that says that it didn't exist in the mythology of it before, because that's how mystery religions work.
Okay, so we're using an argument for silence. We don't know, therefore it happened before. That's an argument for silence, mate. It's a really bad one. For a start, it's not part of Greek beliefs. Greek beliefs said that they would become part of that. The thing is that Adonis nowhere, because it comes from a really shitty source, namely the Kersey Graves and his shitty 30 crucified saviours, which Adonis, if you actually look at his story, never was resurrected. He never came back from the grave until later, much, much later. So saying it did, the burden of proof, buddy, is on you.
And that's what it was. It was a mystery religion, so there's not going to be any kind of written records like around that time. So I don't think that they just made some shit up later. The cult of Adonis was way before Christ. So with them being a mystery religion and it being a cult way fucking before Christ, then I don't see how you could just totally toss that out.
Claims of Krishna's resurrection don't emerge until the 6th or 7th century. Perhaps these accounts are ripping off of Jesus?
Oh, Krishna? Gonna shit on Krishna? Gonna bring out my inner mythicist? Come on, buddy. Take your shot. This is just straight up false. Okay, so if you don't know the story behind Krishna, Krishna was supposedly at a party. I mean, they were throwing, it was a kegger. I mean, there were titties everywhere, everything. Well, he got tired of it. He went and sat underneath a tree. A hunter came by, mistaking him for a deer, and shot his ass. Put an arrow in him, and he died. But his body didn't rot or decay. I don't know if that sounds familiar to you at all. His body did not rot or decay. Instead, he ascended his ass into heaven. The first reference to this was like in the 4th century BCE. So no, Krishna was not turned into one later, nor was he influenced by Jesus. You see, we consider Krishna to be mythical. We don't consider Krishna to be, this magical being. See, what these pagan beliefs are meant to show, as far as how they relate to Jesus, it's perfectly conceivable that people either made this shit up on their own, or they pulled from other cultures.
Well, you get everything right apart from the fact that that's not what dying and rising God actually is. The dying and rising God is that they come back to life. They don't become... Again, he didn't die. Krishna didn't die in any mythology. Now, actually, there's actually a really good article on this. Now, I know you're probably going to know this because he's a Christian apologist, but what Michael Licona did was he saw the film Zeitgeist, and I know it's a film that you've probably seen, Godless Engineer, where Michael Licona actually decided to actually factually check all these claims, and he went round to several universities, one of which was a university about Krishna. I'm not saying that this proves anything, but I'm just giving it just a context here. And the guy said the person who wrote this knew nothing, should actually go to some classes. So do you know what that made me do? Actually go to some classes. I realised that everything you just said was incorrect. And everything that guy said was actually correct. Shocking. Because, you see, the idea of Krishna being resurrected didn't happen until later. Because that's not what resurrection is. What you just described is not what resurrection is. Resurrection is body comes in out of God, body comes out of God. That did not happen in the Krishna idea. Him getting shot with the leg dead, him going, but he didn't die. He was a god. He couldn't die. He's immortal. He never died in his story. That didn't... Again, there is no story that didn't happen until I think Christianity took over until the 6th, 7th century. So actually, the guy is correct factually. So I'd like you to provide me with a source of it happening earlier than that, but you can't because it doesn't happen. Because everything I just said is actually demonstrable to anyone who's actually bothered to give a shit and actually be educated about this subject
from the surrounding areas, and that's exactly. What I feel happened is that the Jews were pulling from cultures around the area because dying and rising gods were just so the rage that, their own religion predicted that somebody would come from God to save them. So it only makes sense. 2 + 2 is equaling 4 in this situation.
But see, that isn't what happened. Because they didn't need to. Because it was part of their own beliefs. Because again, the idea of body coming into God, body coming out of God is a Jewish belief. It's not a pagan belief. And nowhere in paganism is that a pagan belief. Okay? Thing is that is a very Jewish idea. And it shows me that you know nothing about comparative religion whatsoever. You know nothing about, for example, the fact that this stuff comes from, let's say, my country in the 17th century, and it was crap back then. It's crap back then, it's crap now. So I'd like you to show me some evidence of this being the case. The thing is that they didn't need to, because they believed people were going to see them. But again, you have to understand the context of when the New Testament was written, which is Second Temple Judaism. And that's something you don't seem to understand. It comes from a specific time period. Judge it by that specific period. It didn't need to come from another religion. You don't seem to understand the fact that it doesn't need another religion to come from. It comes from the religion of Judaism. That's what Christianity is. It's Jewish. And you seem to think that you're coming on some great revelation that's the case. You aren't. People who are Christians understand that we are Jewish. Jesus wept.
So, to my Christian friends, no need to fret. Our belief in Jesus' resurrection is not of pagan origin.
The whole crucifixion and the life and times of Jesus can all be traced back to either pagan beliefs or Old Testament and scriptures, or other scriptures other than the Old Testament, of course. The book of Daniel offers a blueprint to the resurrection. Throughout the entire thing, you have copied phrases. Even the same actions were done, that mimic what's in Daniel. Pilate being unsure of whether to put Jesus to death, that's in Daniel. The sealing of the tomb and then somebody coming back to find him, either not there or, in Daniel's case, alive, that's in Daniel. Even the angel that supposedly appears at the tomb, which, I'll mind you, it was either one small boy, an angel flying down from heaven to karate fucking chop the tomb away, or it was two men inside the tomb. Or if you're Paul, it was just an empty fucking tomb, because the rest of the shit is fantastical bullshit. Even the words used to characterize these angels come from Daniel. If you just look at the choice between Barabbas and Jesus, that Pilate gives the crowd, that is just a copy, or a reimagining, if you will, of the Yom Kippur ritual, where you take two goats, you let one go to carry the sins of Israel off, and then you kill the other one as a blood sacrifice. And did you know that in Genesis, Abraham makes Isaac carry the wood that is to be his bond?
I'm going to ask this question, and maybe it's a question that's said, but what in the name of blue hell are you talking about? The fact that people had to carry on crucifix is a historical fact. It's what Romans made people do. So you say that makes Spartacus a mythical figure? Because he had to do that? A lot of people had to do that in every iteration we have of Roman record, where they talked about what happened during crucifixion. So were they talking about a mythical event? Were they pulling for the Balkan Fire? This is why you're full of bullshit, guy. You really need to understand what historical evidence is, and I'll post that down below so you can have a look yourselves.
Fire up the mountain. Just like Jesus is made to carry his wooden cross up the mountain. And of course, the ascension of Jesus mimics all other deities that were dying and rising at the time. Even Romulus, Osiris, Krishna, all of them ascended into heaven. It is my own, belief, my Christ myth, if you will, that everything in Jesus' lifetime in the Bible can be traced back to the Old Testament or pagan traditions. And that is...
I'm going to say this. Right. I'm not trying to say this because I'm a Christian. I want you to believe, like this guy. Or I'm trying to move people's faith. No. I believe in the truth. And the truth shouldn't be a challenge to anyone's faith or lack thereof. And if it is, you really need to take a second look in the mirror then, don't you? If you need to make this sort of bullshit up. And in fact, the factual claims you're making here are demonstrably not true. Jesus does not come from pagan traditions, nor does he come from the Old Testament. He's a Jewish belief based upon a guy who existed in history that we can make claims about. And the story of Jesus himself is a reflection on Second Temple Judaism. It has nothing to do with the Old Testament, parts of it do, because he's harkening back to, for example, the Ten Commandments and other Jewish beliefs that people thought they'd gone away from because of the rise of pagan Rome in the countries. Now again, the thing is that you can say, well, I don't believe in any of the Jesus story because I think it's all mythical bullshit. Fine. You won't believe that? Fine. What I don't have time for is people spreading this bullshit, which is demonstrably false. Because, frankly, you ain't going to deconvert me with this crap. I'm going to laugh at you like I laugh at creationists. Because they both have the same level of evidence. Zero. And actually, the evidence is actually in the contrary here. So I'd like you to provide any shred of evidence for this whatsoever, and I'll take a look at it. This phobia answer, forgery is make it true, out. Oh, by the way, Osiris and Krishna and all those are not comparable to Jesus. Does she know?